Born in 1923 in Fürth, Germany, Heinz Kissinger grew up under a Jewish family and had a relatively normal life for several years. Soon, though, the rise of the Nazis forced him and his family to flee, and they moved to New York City with their relatives. After changing his name, Henry served in the U.S. military during the Second World War and pursued an academic career at Harvard soon after. Making his way onto the political stage through the campaign of Nelson Rockefeller, he eventually became a member of Nixon's cabinet, kicking off a long-lasting career in international politics. Although he remains one of the most controversial historical figures in American politics, it's undebatable that he had a great influence on American foreign policy during this time, both negatively and positively. After graduating from Harvard as a student of government and philosophy, he was almost immediately offered a professor position there. During his time as a professor, he also became a special advisor of foreign affairs to Kennedy and Johnson. After teaching for some years, he was offered to be the foreign relations advisor for Nelson Rockefeller on his campaign for president. Since the White House was Kissinger's ultimate goal, and since he had a special attraction to power, he very quickly accepted the job. Rockefeller failed to win the election, though, and even the party nomination, resulting in the victory of Nixon. Despite being a political opponent, Nixon, knowing of Kissinger's intellect and immersion in global affairs, offered him a position as cabinet as the head of the National Security Council. Kissinger accepted the job, even though he would later admit that he did not personally or professionally like Nixon. During his time in Nixon's cabinet, Kissinger had several issues that he inherited, the main two being Vietnam and the nuclear weapons race with the Soviets. On the subject of Vietnam, Kissinger and Nixon both agreed that a removal of troops and a de-escalation of the conflict would be necessary. This policy is what was referred to as détente. During the war, Kissinger had been holding secret meetings in Paris with his North Vietnamese counterpart Le Duc Tho to settle on terms for withdrawal of U.S. troops and a ceasefire. In 1973, the two of them came to a peace agreement and the troops were withdrawn from Vietnam and the POWs were returned. Although this turned out to be successful, many historians believe that Kissinger's use of secret negotiations rather than public made things move slower, since the people's responses from both countries may have had a positive effect on the efficiency of the process. Another accomplishment of Kissinger was his handling of arms limitations with the Soviets. During his academic career, he spent time studying and discussing the use of nuclear weapons and the rules of war that should be set in regards to them. Years later, as a cabinet member, he had the chance for these ideas to become a reality. In 1971, Kissinger set up back-channel talks with Soviet diplomat Dobrynin at the same time as the SALT talks. SALT was a 3-year process of negotiations between the United States and the Soviet Union concerning anti-ballistic missiles and a few special types of nuclear weapons, and it led to arms limitations between the two countries. This became a significant breakthrough in American-Soviet relations and especially in the arms race, but it was still a long way from completely ending the Cold War. Having been the initiator of the SALT talks and the back-channel talks, Kissinger played a crucial role in arms limitations in the heat of the Cold War. China was another topic of importance during Nixon's presidency, as it was a powerful communist nation as well as a match for the Soviet Union. Kissinger saw this more of a chance to make a military ally against Moscow more than an economic partner, but regardless, he set up talks with Zhou Enlai, Mao Zedong's right-hand man, to try and open up China as an American ally. In 1972, Nixon traveled to China to meet with Mao Zedong, and they officially opened the country up to the United States. There was one incident with the Soviets when Kissinger directly led to a resolution. In 1970, a U-2 spy plane spotted a Soviet missile station being constructed in Cuba. Immediately, Kissinger pointed out the uncanny resemblance of the nearly decade-old Cuban Missile Crisis. While this was happening at the same time as Black September in the Middle East, secret talks about Vietnam, and the election of Allende in Chile, he managed to handle this situation well. Although the Soviets repeatedly denied the creation of a base in Cuba, they eventually packed up and left after constant pressure from Kissinger. The incident there potentially preceded a second Cuban Missile Crisis. Throughout his career, Kissinger had several accomplishments, but it also was littered with failure. An example of this was his support for the overthrowing of President Allende in Chile. Recently, Chile had had a democratic election in which Salvador Allende was chosen. Nixon and Kissinger were immediately concerned because the people of Chile had just elected a Marxist to lead their country. The CIA had come up with a plan to overthrow him, one of which was election tampering, another was a coup. The general idea of impeding the democratic process was avidly supported by Kissinger, and while none of the plans worked out, it was a clear demonstration of Kissinger's flawed diplomacy and his disregard for the people. Another time that Kissinger made mistakes was during U.S. intervention in the Indian-Pakistani conflict over the independence of East Pakistan, otherwise known today as Bangladesh. Indira Gandhi, the Prime Minister of India, threatened to take military action for East Pakistan to gain independence from West Pakistan due to the poor representation and treatment of the former. The latter was supported by the U.S. almost immediately since India was supported by the Soviet Union. Although supporting East Pakistan was a morally correct choice in the conflict, Kissinger knew that strategically it would be a bad idea because it would mean siding with the Soviets rather than China. This decision of Kissinger's is an example of his policy style of realpolitik. Realpolitik is focused on strategic means rather than moral and humanitarian ones, and is a largely conservative form of policy. By following these ideas and choosing to ignore the moral crisis at stake for the East Pakistanis, Kissinger caused a massive lack of credibility in the government on behalf of the people. The insufficiency of moral diplomacy by Kissinger and Nixon helped to form modern liberalism, and in turn led to the election of Ronald Reagan. Kissinger was a figure who had lasting impacts on America's foreign policy, including both the negative and positive ones. Having been a very flawed politician, he provides us with a quintessential learning opportunity with respect to both domestic and foreign policy. His tendency to disregard the people shows us that conducting politics should not be on behalf of a government for strategic purposes, rather it should be conducted on behalf of the people. Kissinger's career teaches us that morality and openness preserves unity, while secrecy and dishonesty does the opposite. And while this seems like a basic notion, it is one that leadership around the world should take into mind in order to create and preserve peace.